Alright everyone, so this is the tutorial for the second week of CS401 at 5:30 on Tuesday the 13th of February, which is 6:30 New Zealand time. I thought I would just do a short recording for this tutorial because there weren't any students at the video conference as of time of recording, but there's still a few important things that we should probably go through, so I'll record this and then post it up. So firstly, I wanted to obviously mention that there has been a kind of a pretty major change in the way that we're going to run this course. So because so many of you are have full-time jobs, we realized that the original scheduled lecture time of 4 to 6 p.m. Wasn't going to work for the majority of students, and so what we've done instead is we've kind of swapped the lectures and tutorials around. So what do I mean by that? Well, what we're going to do each week is that we will record the lectures we will pre-record the lectures here in New Zealand, and we'll post them up before the tutorial each week. So I'm not sure exactly when they're going to go up each week. My hope is that it would go up by Monday at the latest, and our hope is that you'll be able to watch those lectures. I'll put them up in short chunks of 10 or 15 minutes or so, probably about 3 or 4 of them for a typical lecture. My hope is that you'll get time to watch those before coming to the tutorial, and then we can use the tutorials, which will now run on a Tuesday from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. They'll all be via Zoom, so you can either turn up to the campus there in Suva and join in with the rest of your classmates in the video conferencing facility there, or you can sign in from home if that's easier from you. But either way, that will give us the ability to spend a bit of one-on-one time with you guys and me, where I can hopefully answer your questions about anything that doesn't make sense in the lectures, or any questions that you have about the assigned readings for each week. So that's how the course is going to proceed going forward. For the first half of the course, there aren't any practical labs, but there will be a class presentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time in this particular video going over some of the kind of expectations I have each week. So my hope is that by the time you come to one of these tutorials, you'll have done the reading from the preceding week, and you'll have watched the lecture for this week. So this week's lecture was mostly on privacy and security, and all of the lectures are now posted up on the 401 course homepage. But usually what I do in a tutorial is I'd ask you a few questions, or discuss a few questions that I think are interesting that came up from the lecture and from the reading. So to give you an example of a question that I might want to ask that might appear in a test or an exam or something, would be from the lecture of last week. You probably want to know, how is CS401 going to be assessed? So hopefully you could answer that by saying there's 20% for a class presentation, there's 30% for 2 assignments, there's 40% for the final exam, and they all go together to add up to the 100%. Hopefully you could tell me a few other bits and pieces, and it's my hope that you would have watched the privacy lecture that came out this week as well. But hopefully the tutorials aren't more about revising the lectures, they're more about getting to grips with the material from the readings, because that's the really, that where you go and do independent reading is where you'll do most of the majority of the learning for this course. And so an interesting example would be something along the lines of giving an example of, for the reading of last week, which you can find down here. If I scroll down on the home page, you can see that the reading for last week, scroll all the way down to week 1, the reading for week 1 was this ASCS threat report. And so I'm just going to open that up in another tab so we can take a look at it together. Now I'm not going to scroll through it, because it is your job to go away and read it. But essentially this is a document that is put out by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre each year, and it gives you a pretty good overarching summary of where cybersecurity is at the moment. And I'm particularly interested in this one because it throws up some pretty interesting jargon keywords that it's going to be important for us to to come to grips with. So, like I said, a question I might ask would be, what are some of the major challenges listed in this document? So there are quite a few, and hopefully you've gone through and had a read of them. But just just as I scroll down here, probably the easiest way to find them, the kind of key points are outlined here in the current challenges. So the summary of this is that cybercrime is a pretty pervasive threat to Australia and of course many countries' national security, but in particular for 2017, some particular kinds of cybersecurity issues actually arose, and that's the ones that I want to highlight. So the first one that I want to highlight here is this one, this ransomware thing. We haven't talked about it in lecture explicitly, although I've mentioned it a couple of times, but what ransomware is a way of encrypting someone else's computer and then essentially charging them a ransom to de-encrypt that. Now, this was obviously quite common in 2017 with the WannaCry exploit, which required a payment of bitcoins to unlock a target's computer. It played havoc with the UK National Health Service, where they had a lot of unpatched security there. But one of the biggest issues actually wasn't WannaCry, but a follow-up attack called NotPetya. And the interesting thing about NotPetya is that while on the surface it looked to be exactly the same, in that it locked someone out of their computer and asked them to pay a ransom to unlock it, NotPetya actually just completely encrypted the hard drive, not in a way that was ever decryptable. So the aim for that one just seems to have been to create chaos and disruption rather than actually get money out of people, whereas WannaCry was quite successful in getting money out of people, but also it could be decrypted afterwards if the ransom was paid. With NotPetya, even if the ransom was paid, there was no way to get that data back. A different kind of malware that's also mentioned quite heavily in many of these things is this credential harvesting malware. This, if it's not obvious, are things like keyloggers that steal details, login details, account numbers, and there's a variety of different ways to do this across a variety of different different devices and operating systems, like we talked about in lecture last week. So this report particularly highlights the increasing skillfulness of cyber criminals in order to create this credential harvesting malware, and it being a need for a unified approach between banks and transaction agents to try and prevent this kind of fraud. And of course the final one that's mentioned here is social engineering, which can be a variety of different things, but oftentimes it's using normal human discussion techniques, posing to be someone who you're not, or obtaining some information or making some clever guesses about something to weasel your way past an otherwise secure cyber system. This is becoming increasingly sophisticated. We're seeing it with email phishing scams, we're seeing it with phone calls, we're seeing it with websites, we're seeing it with malicious attacks in a variety of different places now. But these three, ransomware, credential harvesting malware, and social engineering, are the three kind of major current challenges that pulled out of the ACSC 2017 report from me. Of course, you may have read it and got something else out of it, and that's what we would usually discuss in a tutorial. Of course, if you scroll down a couple of pages, a few other interesting things pop up as well. In particular, I should say, the changing threat environment. This diagram here is really quite excellent. Oh, I went slightly too far. Just going to scroll back down to it. There we go. So the threat environment here is interesting in 2017 because it's changing. You can see things mentioned like the Internet of Things, IoT, this large number of incommunicative, very badly protected devices that can be co-opted by a smart hacker to perform denial of service attacks or any other kind of attacks onto other devices without being traceable. The increasing amounts of malicious software, the increasing capabilities of cyber criminals, they're all listed in that threat environment. And this leads into the next major point of this reading, which is how the kind of threat environment, sorry, I'm just going to scroll up, has changed. So the major points, and these are worth committing to memory, because some of the stuff, well, it's important to know as a cybersecurity professional, but also it's worth noticing that these are the kind of questions that will pop up in tests and exams and things. The environment has changed because we're seeing the frequency, scale, and sophistication of cyber incidents increase. We're seeing more diverse and innovative attempts to try and compromise government and private sector networks. We're seeing increasing number and scale of distributed denial of service attacks and incidents. We're seeing deliberate cybercriminal targeting of high-value targets. CEOs, CTOs, executives are prime targets for cybercriminals, and an increasing push from foreign states to push cyber attacks. Of course, the classic example are the Russian interference with the American election in 2016, but there have been a number of other foreign state cyber attacks over the last year, and we're only expecting these to get more significant in the future. And so that's really it for this part of the tutorial. It's not too long. I will log on later on as well if you've got any other questions, if there's things that you want to discuss around this, because in a few weeks we will have to present to the class on this, where I'll be there in person to assess you. That's coming up in week 6 for this course. Do feel free to email me or talk on the discussion forum. What I'll do now though is I'll just record another short video which will be an introduction to assignment 1 for CS401.